one of the most interesting things about that movement is not so much the frivolity of acting out against your suburban parents. There was already a kind of a deep cynicism about the spectacle of the Cold War that generation was so conscious of, and that's where it sort of comes from. And I think I'm sort of in this transitional phase, but my generation is sort of a generation that understood that we were part of a kind of a dying ideological sphere that was sort of becoming something else. And then, of course, from 85 to 90, you have the origins of digital space entering the art world, and by that I mean techniques of production and things like that, which is, I still remember, in 86, 87, the school I went to, Apple donated a bunch of computers to the graphic design department, and I don't really think of my production as problems that the work produces, and by that I mean like the kind of questions that it makes. They're not really rooted in the 20th century. I think it was a generation, it was a time where people could actually kind of look at things directly, and there was a different sense of cynicism. Whereas I think in the 80s and the 90s, my generation hadn't really articulated what response might be. We all sort of felt this could last really on this idea. The Russians and the Americans and the entire world order being organized by that principle wasn't going to hold anymore. Because people weren't scared of it, been living with it for too long. The bomb never came.
Maybe I could ask you to sort of speculate a little bit here. I was wondering, if you're a 21-year-old graduate from art school here at the start of the 21st century, and maybe your name was something other than Jorge Pardo, what do you think your problems or challenges as an artist would be, or would you like them to be today? And I ask this question partly because I'm sort of interested in notions of reinvention, or almost imagined reinvention of oneself.
The problem I would start with is the problem of consequence. How do you start to evaluate what the value of that type of that practice is at this moment? How does something go from being like an incredibly narcissistic endeavor, like being an artist, to actually output these kind of cultural products that would change the way we think about what's most disturbing about things we live with? That's the same question that I had when I was a kid, but I think it's still the same. It's just a question of the details are very different. Most of the students that I have that are interesting are really thinking about how to distribute what they do in an interesting way. They kind of put these things out that aren't videos or information, different things, and then they realize that there's no real space in the gallery for them to kind of become objects and kind of gain value and make a living and things like that. So I think that's really the fundamental question for somebody today, is like, is art still a kind of viable enterprise for actually communicating complicated problems? I think most of the stuff that I see is pretty narcissistic and not really interested in anything outside of the realm of what the fetish is about the material or the subject.
Do you see a similar fetish in terms of nostalgia for a time they haven't themselves experienced?
I think it's even dumber than that. I think nostalgia, it implies that you have a consciousness of what you lost or what you didn't have access to. I think it's much more interesting than that, in the sense that these archetypes or these kind of modalities that are kind of used that come from other periods are equivalent to just any other kind of information, because they're sort of accessed in the same way. You go to Wikipedia and it really doesn't matter. You could be talking about like palm shoes or 68 revolution, 68 Paris revolution, or it's on the same level. It's not really a nostalgia of things that you do. There's a desperation for content. Never kind of makes it. That desperation is never informed by actual complicated reflexive modes or modalities. It's just a matter of like representing the image of the thing that's in. But it's not. It doesn't go a step further. It's just like, why the fuck is this interesting to me? Who am I becoming by being interested in this kind of product, or this kind of thing, or this kind of ideas? It's like, what are the consequences of my inquiry? That rarely happens. That is the most critical thing I was going to ask myself.
And do you think that's a sort of unique predicament of this time in history?
No, but I think there's always been this problem. I mean, there's always been really bad art in the world, but really stupid artists. But now it seems like there seem to be more. It's really hard to get people to read interesting texts and theory and things like that, especially undergraduates. It's like pulling teeth. Really basic things like, okay, look at a text. Read the text and give the reading of it. You know what they think they're supposed to be doing? They think they're supposed to be repeating what they read. It's like, no, this is about developing a position, generating a position, and having problems or not. Super stupid, simple things. Like, and then you get this kind of like this glass-eyed look that they come back with. I think that the idea of depth and deeply and things like that has changed.
I think Wikipedia is the perfect depiction of that, right? Because you're given the impression or the delusion, perhaps, that you can pretty much find something about pretty much everything. And once you've read those 3 or 4 lines about that something, you close the page thinking that you know that thing to some extent.
The delusion is the sense that you're in an archive that's complete.
Yeah.
That's the delusion. It is.
All right, one other question about getting you to speculate a little bit. I'm just wondering if now was not now, but any other time from the past, when would you wish now was? And would that desire derive from the art or the design of that time you'd like to experience it firsthand?
I've never looked back. I'm not interested in the past problems. I mean, I'm interested in what my life's going to be like 10 years from now. I feel like it's going to be so radically different. I've always really looked at history as interesting dead moments. I've never been nostalgic, knock on wood, so far. And it gets harder as you get older. I'm interested in the future. I'm interested. My work is sort of a product of all the problems that I saw in the past, and particularly recent past. Like all the kind of ideological contradictions that people before me had, like in the 60s and 70s, these very well-meaning kind of hypocritical Marxists that were teaching me. So I don't want to go back to any of that shit. I'm not interested in it. I think going back to before the war, all that stuff. It's just never been interesting. I like technology. I like when things are strange.
Last question, really. I just picked up this Warhol quote, which is actually quite famous, where he said, after I did the thing called art, or whatever it's called, I went into business art. I wanted to be an art businessman or a business artist. Being good in business is the most fascinating kind of art. Making money is art and working is art, and good business is the best art. Is that true or false?
I think it's probably false, because you got to remember Warhol's a commercial artist from day one, and I think that the intensities of his work come from a very traditional sort of reading of the image. So when he says things like that, it's obviously super interesting to hear these things, and it's interesting because the art world is so overheated, and primarily it's so overheated, I think. Because of what you mentioned earlier. It's going to be more and more overheated because of the disproportionate sense of the distribution of wealth, more than anything else. The price of art is just a direct reflection of that. Business is business, art is art. Thinking about it any other way is probably not so interesting or not so productive. It's a given that every artist that wants to work for a while has to understand the basics of how the value of what you do is made, but to sort of focus on that and say that's an art form. I don't really know why you would need to do that. Why does business need to be art? It's not a prerogative. It's not an issue that's about any kind of morality or anything, or keeping it separate. It's like saying the best version of a hamburger is a potato chip or something. It doesn't make any fucking sense.
So I'd like to bring conclusion to Shimon and Jorge and to thank them on such an interesting and actually stimulating first Skype session here as part of the exhibition. Going on to session 2, we have our next speaker, a very prominent art critic. His name is Alex Coles. Alex Coles is an art critic and an editor. He is the editor of Design Art, Tate Publishing 2005, and numerous catalogue essays for Vitra, Art Angel and Tate. His criticism appears regularly in Art Monthly and Art Review and the Financial Times. Alex is also the editor of Design and Art, MIT Press, Whitechapel, and to be fair to say, a very close friend, and has written numerous publications on Jorge Pardo. As we go into this exciting second session, it'll be good to look at the reflective reactions of both Jorge Pardo and Alex Coles. So without further ado, we go into session 2.